All right, so it is 6 o'clock on the first webinar of our school year season. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight as we discuss how to creatively build observation skills. I'm really excited to be back with you all. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new names. Let's jump into it. So most of us are probably really familiar with Zoom by now, but I just wanted to take a second to go over a couple things. If your screen is in full screen, I'm going to recommend that you actually exit full screen. These days, you can do that by double tapping on your view of my screen. And that'll be really useful for you to dock the chat window to the side of your screen. That's going to allow us to have conversations together where you can see what everybody else is saying. You'll do that by finding the little speech bubble icon. And I also just want to flag you to make sure that you're sending your messages to everyone instead of hosts and panelists. And you'll change that in this little drop down right above where you type your messages. So I am coming to you from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's K-12 education team in Ithaca, New York, where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. My name is Kelly Schaefer, and I'm our outreach coordinator, and I am joined by Susan Licker, who is our educational specialist. She'll be in charge of the chat window today, there to help answer questions and share resources as relevant. And our mission at the K-12 education team is to create innovative resources and trainings that build science skills while inspiring young people to connect to local habitats, explore biodiversity, and engage in citizen science projects. And the topic that we're going to be talking about today is going to focus a lot more on that beginning part of building these connections to local habitats, but also building science skills, because I think there are lots of great interconnections between art and science, which we'll talk about a little bit today. And I just want to pop over to our chat window where everybody was sharing where they are from and what kind of educator they are. And it looks like we have a really wonderful mix of formal and informal. We've got lots of states represented, which is always exciting. Illinois, Nevada, Virginia, DC, Florida, Vermont, New Hampshire. Awesome. New Jersey, Ohio. Good stuff. Thank you all so much for making the time to join us today. So I want to start with kind of the why of this webinar. So when I think about nature art, I really think of it as a way of building connections and building empathy and love. And the reason that I think love is a really important piece of the puzzle is kind of illustrated here in these three quotes. The first from Stephen Jay Gould saying, "We cannot win this battle to save species and environments without forging an emotional bond between ourselves and nature as well. For we will not fight to save what we do not love." And then John Muir Law says that a useful definition of love is sustained, compassionate attention. And Wendy says that drawing is looking and looking is loving. So you can see this connection here that I'm drawing between building a connection to our environments for ourselves, but also for the health of those environments, and using art as a way to inspire that sustained and compassionate attention. So in this webinar, I'm really hoping to cover three main things. I want to talk about nature art and kind of the ways it has historically existed. I want to talk a little bit about the interactions between art and science, and basically share some of the awesome activities that we discovered over the past year as we were doing some virtual programming. These activities will be adaptable. You could do them in person or online, depending on what your learning situation is like right now. So this was really inspired by a camp, a summer camp and a fall enrichment program that we called Wild About Art. It was a 5-day long, 1 hour each experience. And as we went through these programs, we really discovered that art can be such an engaging framework to help kids build connections with nature and also build some really great science skills like observation. We also discovered a handful of activities that I'm going to share with you today that you might find useful in your classroom, and some ways of delivering them that really helped kids be receptive to them. So one of the things we learned was that if you're going to invite students to do art and share art, it can be really useful to create a space where messiness is encouraged and welcomed. So we don't need to be perfect. We don't have to create perfect works of art every time. We just are creating and having fun. So let's jump into this idea of nature art, and I'd like to throw this out to you. Please feel free to share your ideas in the chat window. What is nature art? And what do you think of when you think of nature art? Jill is saying it could be art about nature using natural materials, art inspired by, with, and in nature. Love it. Robin is saying using materials from the world to create design. Cool. Representations of nature. Anything from nature that inspires you to record artistically. I like that, Sandra. Very nice. Karen's saying it's broad. It can be using natural materials, images, or natural items. Mary's bringing up bowerbird installations. Yes, I love it. So art actually made by birds and made in nature. Great, awesome. I would agree with all of those definitions. I think that art is really wonderful because it has such a flexible definition. I like to think of art as anything that moves you, that's created, that moves you and creates like an emotional experience. So it could be something using natural materials. It could be something inspired by watching nature, like the paper cutting here and the sketches here as well. One of my very favorite things about nature art, though, is that it is old. It is such an amazing part of our history. So this image here is just a snapshot from a cave painting in Sulawesi, Indonesia, from 44,000 years ago. And this is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, preserved cave painting out there. And look what we're seeing. We're seeing people depicting animals. And even if you look, it looks like there might be some hunting going on right here. So nature and the environment that we live in has always inspired us to create art and capture our lives in that environment. And the ways that we do that can be varied. So as we were saying in the chat window, using natural materials can be a great way to create art. There's a British artist, Andy Goldsworthy, who's known for using natural materials to make art in the outdoors. These are often pieces of work that are temporary. They are using the environment, highlighting a hole in the ground, using the reflection of a lake to create a circle, modifying natural objects that are found outside. So we can have art like this. There's also art using natural materials that reflects more of what we see in our day-to-day lives. I love these leaf canvases from Spanish artist Lorenzo M. Duran. Then there's American artist Nick Cave, who uses birds and flowers as symbols in these amazing, somewhat abstract pieces. I would consider this inspired by nature. There's also things like nature photography, where we're capturing these amazing vistas and the animals and plants that live in them. And this picture is by Italian nature photographer Marco Grassi. And then there's art depicting animals. So here we see Jane Kim, who is the founder of Inkwell Studio, and she paints scientifically accurate nature murals. And we will come back to Jane and talk a little bit more about her work in a minute here. But all of this art has some things in common. And besides being inspired by nature, it requires certain skills. So I'd love to throw it out to you and ask you, what skills do you think make a good artist? Creativity, patience, willingness to be messy, absolutely, attention to detail, being observant, observation, open-mindedness. I'm seeing observation and open-mindedness pop up multiple times. Also, the idea of being able to make mistakes and being non-judgmental. And Christina says, a good artist is one who expresses themselves with imagination and being authentic to themselves. I love that authentic piece. So over and over again, as I read through your comments, I see the idea of observation and looking closely and paying attention to details. And I think that is a really great skill to focus in on. It's one that we can build in our students. Kids are naturally curious, but we don't always have a lot of practice looking at things closely. So observation really is a skill that you can learn and build up in your students. And it's one of those skills that has a lot of utility across all sorts of different kinds of learning. Practicing observation skills also really supports critical thinking, right? When you're really paying close attention to something, you can start asking questions and thinking about things in ways that you haven't before. And we often see these observations lead to curious questions that we can chase down and inspire deeper learning. So observation is a really wonderful skill to foster. And we can do that in so many different ways, but I think that art is a really fun and easy entry point for a lot of kids. So I'm just going to share a super quick observation activity that I liked to do with kids in camp. I share this image, and I want to throw this question out to you too. I want to know, what do you notice when you look at this? Do you have any idea what you're looking at? You can share just what you're seeing. You can also share any ideas you might have about what it could be. Overlapping layers, uniformity. I do see some uniformity in shape, direction. Color gradient could be flower petals. 3 main colors, looks like fish scales. Seeing scales a couple times, scales on a butterfly. Nice. I'm seeing some just like ideas too, like order, repetition, grid, repeating pattern, and things it makes us think of, like pine cone or petals or scales. Cornflakes. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? All right. So what if I zoom out a little bit and I give us a little more information to work with? Does this provide you with more clues about what we might be looking at? feather, a snake. We're looking kind of like more like scales now. Kathy's saying a butterfly wing. Jennifer's saying scales on a butterfly. Reptile skin. It looks like scales, doesn't it? We'll zoom out one more time. And now I'm seeing more responses come in. Monarch. So all of you who are saying scales on a butterfly wing, you're absolutely right. This is super close photography or macro photography of butterfly wings. So you can see this pattern now when I zoom out all the way, and you can see kind of those little areas in between. You can start to see where there might be little scales out there. So it's kind of wild to think about all these details that we don't really notice unless we're looking really close. Now to see those, we need some mechanical assistance to look that close. But when you show something like this to kids, it kind of sparks their imagination, and it can be a really great example of how looking closely can change your perspective on something. And I do want to say, somebody mentioned flower petals, and now I'm looking at this petal here, going back a couple, and there are some really strong like similarities I'm noticing too in the shape, but also in kind of the folds you see. It's cool. All right. So I want to talk to you about an exercise, and I want to challenge you to do this exercise in a minute, but not yet. And this is something called blind contour drawing. I really love this exercise as a way to get people started putting pencil on paper. Younger kids, I find, will embrace art projects really easily. And then sometimes older kids, because they're caught up in this idea of making things really good, perfect looking, that it's harder to get started. And this is a really awesome activity for getting started. And I think it benefits from a demonstration. So I'm going to share a view of my desk in just a moment here, so you can see my paper. But first I'm going to explain how this works. So the first thing that you do is you find an object. I've chosen a pine cone for today. And then you're going to draw that object without looking at your paper. So unfortunately, in my view, it's going to be hard for you to see what I'm drawing without it being on my paper, but I'm going to be focusing on what I'm drawing and not looking at my hand. And so you don't know what you're drawing over. You don't lift your pen from the paper or your pencil from the paper. And you don't look at your paper, and you just use your eyes and the coordination with your hand to try and draw what you're seeing. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what I mean. Okay. So you should be seeing now my desk. And it's going to be sideways for you. I apologize. It's the best I can do. So let me move a couple things around so I can see what you're seeing. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a point on the pine cone. I'm going to start right at the top here, and then I'm just going to kind of follow it with my eyes. I'm going to be paying really close attention to shape, but I'm not going to be worrying about where I am on my paper or anything like that. I'm going to be paying almost no attention to where. Okay, so just looking at the pine cone and not looking at my paper, I'm going to start just kind of outlining what I'm seeing, and that's not working because my hand's in the way. So maybe we'll try a view like this. All right, so I'm just drawing these shapes that I'm seeing. I'm paying attention to the lines, and I'm seeing like a lot of just kind of angles and semicircles, making these almost scale-like parts of the pine cone. And I'm going to just kind of try and get the idea of this shape. And what you'll notice when you're not looking at what you're actually drawing is that it's kind of a really weird feeling. All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit because I think you guys get the point. But what's interesting about this is the final product always ends up being something other than you expect. I'm going to just try and go in and fill in some of these middle shapes too. All right, so that's what I came up with. It is obviously not a great representation or perfect representation of this, but I feel like you look at it and you can still say in your mind pine cone, right? And so what's fun about this exercise is that everybody's piece is going to look like this. It's going to be no perfect piece out there, which is a great introduction to drawing in a classroom or with people around you if you're nervous. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my other share here, and I'm going to put up an image of a pine cone, and I would love for you to give this a try. Okay, so now you should be seeing my computer screen again. And so here's your pine cone image. So grab a piece of paper. I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to give this exercise a try, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Feel free to ask any questions if you need to in the chat window. "30-second warning. If you're done, feel free to share in the chat window any feelings or observations you had about doing this exercise, or if you need more time. Kathy's saying it turned out better than she expected. It's so tempting to take a look, isn't it? It really is. More in tune than you could have imagined. B saying hers doesn't look fantastic. That's okay. They're not supposed to look fantastic. It is a bit of a meditative exercise. Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you're not looking at the page, Kayla's saying that it's easy to go on and off. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's my favorite low pressure exercise for starting getting those drawing juices flowing, creating the kind of atmosphere you want to create where messiness is not only allowed but encouraged. And it can also be fun to do that early on and do some more drawing exercises and come back to drawing a pine cone and let them, actually look at the pine cone and see how that looks when they're using, being able to actually look where their pencil is. Awesome. Thank you for playing along with me there. So we've talked about observation as important skill, but I also want to throw it back to you regarding how art and science are related. So what kind of connections do you see between art and science? Observation skills, sure. Observation of the natural world. Anyone can do both, even if they don't realize it, sure. A lot of field guides that have hand-drawn images, sure. So they complement each other. Communication of ideas and observations. Both test their materials. I like that. Seeing patterns. Estimating and measuring, sure. If you're trying to draw really scientifically accurate drawings, it requires a lot of careful attention to those things like measurements. Awesome. Those are all critical thinking, absolutely. Those are all great. I think that it's very true. Science and art are related in a lot of different ways, not just in the skills that we use to achieve them, but also in our ability to communicate about our world. So science is a way of knowing and art can be a way of expressing. And when you combine them together into scientific illustration, for example, it can be a really useful way of communicating information. And art can help us remember scientific information as well. So I'm going to share a brief video clip with you about John James Audubon, one of the first people who really began to paint birds in their natural habitats, and how that use of art changed science.
When the birds of America first began to appear in 1827, it was a revelation. No one had seen anything like this before. A book this size, a book with such vivid depictions of birds in their natural context. After that, no natural history artist could ever go back to the old model of working in museums with taxidermied specimens. Artists had to go out into the field. John James Audubon is known through the eponymous Audubon Society. He was a great conservationist as well as a fantastic artist and ornithologist.
So John James Audubon, as both an ornithologist and an artist, changed the way that people wanted to start doing art and recording their observations of birds by including habitat and providing the context for the birds and how they survive. And so when you look at artwork like this, you're really looking not just at the bird, but its habitat, and you get a better idea for how it fits into the environment. And that tradition has really been carried on in things like that we now refer to as scientific illustration. So this artist that I mentioned earlier, Jane Kim, she is a scientific illustrator. And so her artwork is gorgeous and moving, but it is also very careful and to be accurate. So she creates these amazing murals. So she has these migration themed murals across the US in multiple cities. Here we see one of the monarch ones, and we see artistic depictions of flowers, but also those are, you know, the accurate shape of a milkweed flower. So we see the butterfly in its context. She also created the amazing mural at the lab called the Wall of Birds. So I'm going to jump over to that site real quick here. Hopefully you are seeing that as well. So this mural is on the wall at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, but it is also available here through a Bird Academy to share, to explore online. So we can click on a bird here. Let's go for the secretary bird. And you can click on the bird, you can zoom in. You can see some of the amazing detail captured in this artwork. I think she does an incredible job of capturing some of the attitude of these birds. So you get a feeling almost of personality from them. And then here on the right, it's combined with scientific descriptions of the family of birds that are represented, with citizen science data maps of where the bird has been seen. And occasionally, if it's available, there will be a sound. It doesn't look like there's one for the secretary bird. So if we zoom back out to look at the whole mural, what you're seeing here is a visual representation of every family of birds in the world. So one bird representing a family of birds. They are painted to scale, and they are placed with their feet in one of the regions where they live. So if we come over to Central America, we can pick on the resplendent quetzal, and we can see those incredible tail feathers. We can listen to a sound. It's almost kind of mournful. So there's really amazing ways that you can really see science and art in partnership here, creating an educational experience. This is also a really wonderful resource for your students to explore. You can challenge them to find, I've done, just when we're thinking about it artistically, I've done things like, you know, can you find every color of the rainbow? And what birds are they on? Which bird do you think is the most beautiful and why? You can also do things related to ecology, like which bird do you think is the most dangerous, or the best predator, or the fastest flyer, and have them start looking and thinking about those sort of things. So this is a great educational resource available out there to you. But I also want to share which bird would you like to dress up as? That is such a good one. That would be so fun in Halloween. All right, yes. So I'm going to share a brief clip here from Jane about what it takes to do art like this.
Right here, what I'm working on right now, the tip of the wing. In this small version, I don't actually really know what the feathers are doing right here. And I'm just drawing what the colors are doing. But that's the kind of thing that I want to find examples either from an actual spread wing study or through better photographs, how the feathers are actually connecting to the wing.
Great. The tarsus is about 5 inches.
So it's pretty good.
It is, it's really good.
On this guy, it's like all white, essentially, except for the ends like this.
Yeah, so I think you're gonna be able to get away with kind of having this center portion be just kind of a clean white.
That makes sense. But maybe if
And
I
then-
even just have a direction of a shaft every now and
Yeah,
then.
so, right, because you really want to nail the primaries coming out of the right spot and then filling in.
Drawing out the most fundamental shapes of feathers allows me to put down shadows and subtleties in the wing that I wouldn't be able to do without having taken the time to research that and accurately draw that out to scale. If you notice on the
So this video is a really great way to highlight for students what goes into artwork like this. It provides an opportunity to talk about skills that we talked about when we talked about the relationship between art and science and see those in practice. So we saw her measuring, we saw her focusing on accuracy, as well as talking about things like color and shading and watching her put in those tiny little details. So this can be a fun way to explore what scientific illustration looks like. One of my favorite activities that I like to do with students was I like to challenge them to think about perspective. So digital art is another, or excuse me, digital photography is another really awesome way to incorporate art into your learning. And so I liked to incorporate a little bit about what wildlife and nature cinematography entails. And so this is a video about Garrett Vinn, who is a wildlife photographer who used to work for the lab and kind of talks a little bit about perspective. This is actually available in our Cooped Up Kids lessons. There's a series of videos which can be really awesome about people talking about their work. And that's, I believe it might be our 8th. It's about taking the Expedition Earth is what it's called. So let's watch this video real quick.
My name is Garrett Vinn. I'm a cinematographer and photographer for the Cornell Labs multimedia team. One project we're currently working on is the story of migratory shorebirds, particularly those that utilize the Yellow Sea in China and South Korea during migration. This is an area that's seeing immense human pressures that is greatly affecting the bird life that migrates to that area. Birds go there from Alaska and across Asia, and it's sort of a grand central station for birds where they rest and refuel, and then they fan out from there and head farther south for the winter. This past fall, we were filming in South Korea and in China at numerous locations. We were filming a lot of different kinds of birds, mostly shorebirds. There was a lot of dunlin there that time of year. We filmed broad-billed sandpipers and a few spoon-billed sandpipers, which was fantastic to get up close and intimate with these birds. And we got the first really close, intimate footage of these birds foraging during migration that's ever been shot. So that was a real highlight of working out there. There was one instance where I was trying to film another yellow sea specialist called the blackface spoonbill. I ended up sliding in the mud for almost a kilometer. And in the slippery mud, I just kept working my way closer and closer and closer to the birds. And by the end of the few hours of being out there, I'm just totally caked in mud. When filming them, our goal is really to bring behavior and their personalities to life on the screen. And the best way to do that is really to get down on their level and get close, to really capture them in their environment. That's why I do the work that I do. I want people to see the remarkable, incredible things that we have on our planet that are very easy to overlook unless you're able to really see them up close.
What I love about this video is in this short 2-minute clip, Garrett Vinn gets at the idea of perspective so well. He talks about, trying to capture personality and seeing the world as the birds would see it. And you have that amazing image of him crawling on his belly through the mud to be low enough to get that perspective. One of the reasons that I think perspective is important has to do with one of the theories involved in environmental education, which is related to empathy. So there is this idea, along with the quotes I shared earlier, that empathy is kind of a form of relation and emotional connection like love that allows us to care for our world better. And one of the ways that you promote empathy is by creating familiarity. And noting similarity between yourself and your subject. So I like this exercise because it puts you in the mind, or I like perspective-based exercises because they put you in the mindset of whatever your subject is. And so that creates an opportunity for you to build an emotional connection with their perspective and build some familiarity and build some empathy. So how I talk about perspective with students, and this might be useful to you if you wanted to do some digital photography, is some pictures that I've taken. So this is a photo I took in my front yard at the time, and it's just of a flower. There's nothing particularly remarkable about it. So I started to ask myself, how could I make this a more interesting photo? And I decided that the question that might make it more interesting is if I ask, how would a bee see this flower? And then I change the perspective of the photo accordingly. So I got up really close, I zoomed in, I changed the angle, and now I'm really focusing in on the structure of the flower, and I notice the pollen, and it just feels like a totally different photo, even though it's of the same subject. Another example that I've found useful to talk about is this toad I found, and looking down at it is one perspective, but it's not how the toad sees the world. So if I ask myself, what's this toad's perspective? How does it see the world? Then that changes the way that you would take the photo, right? You get down low, you can see its eye, you wonder about what it's thinking about. And so this exercise in perspective, then I would challenge students to go take their own photos and take it from different perspectives. And some students would find a bee on a flower and take that picture, but others would imagine a squirrel running along a fence and then take a picture along that rail of the fence. So it was really cool to see the things that they came up with. And now with technology like smartphones in our hands, this can be an easier sort of exercise to do with students. And then I liked to kind of bring it back to this idea of perspective and create an art challenge for them, where I would ask them to pick an animal that lives near a pond, and you could use this image as a kind of jumping off point, and then draw that pond from that animal's perspective. So like that turtle on the log, or what does the fish see, or the bird flying over. And so you would get everybody drawing essentially the same pond, but choosing different animals, and then you see the pond entirely differently. And so that it really got people thinking about, what is my bird seeing? What is my fish seeing? Somebody was drawing their fish and they had, the roots of plants and they had insects flying over, but they had the shadow of the eagle flying over too. So they were thinking about the habitat and how the animal relates to it, which was really fun and exciting to see. All right, so now I want to just jump into some activities that I think you might find useful to have in your repertoire. Some of these first ones I'm going to focus on are ones made with nature-based materials. So one that I like to do is called the Nature Mandala. This is a geometric shape. The word itself means circle. And you make this circular design. You can collect whatever materials you want from nature and create your own piece. So we were doing this program online. So, some students would go out and use pieces in nature. Some kids weren't able to go out for whatever reason and use pieces, different things, colorful things that they found in their homes. So it is adaptable. We had some really fun creative ones where people couldn't go outside, but they cut, their construction paper or their scrap paper into natural shapes to create theirs as well. And here are some of the ones that our students came up with. Some were simple, some were very intricate. I love this one where a student used the circular stump as the base for their mandala, and it made the ground they were working with part of the mandala. Again, this is just a really simple meditative kind of experience. You can also make sure that you specify that students only use materials that aren't living if you're worried about picking flowers and such. Another nature material activity we would like to do is creating nature paintbrushes. So collecting some sticks and some feathery materials. I typically use dry grasses, I use pine needles or flowers. Some kids found feathers that they would use and then create nature paintbrushes using them. It's super fun. You just need some tape or a rubber band to attach your brush material to whatever stick you're using, and then create some artwork with paint. One tip I will give is that if you're using like acrylic paints, you might need to make them a little bit thinner so that the paint transfers from the brush better. We had students make all sorts of fun art. It's a little bit more like stamping, like you're not going to get very detailed works, but you can get amazing textures. The college student I was working with at the time was in Florida, and she used an entire palm frond as a 9-foot long paintbrush. So that was very exciting. So it's just a fun way to think about different materials outside, spend a little time collecting them, and then you get to see the cool different textures that they create. All right, so this last exercise I want us to do together relates back to our conversation about art and science and scientific illustration and John James Audubon and this idea of kind of field sketching, right? So one of the questions I like to pose to the kids is, why might it be important to be a quick observer when drawing or painting in nature? And as Sandra's saying in the chat window, birds and critters move a lot and they move quickly. So if you want to be able to draw them, you got to think fast, right? So usually before I do this activity, however, I'll talk a little bit about how to draw birds and a little bit about ways that we identify birds. So size and shape and color pattern, because that helps them know what to focus on when they're drawing. So I call this our quick sketch challenge. As I mentioned, I would go over some tips on how to identify birds for this beforehand. So things like the silhouette I would really stress, and color pattern. I was able to get a guest speaker come in to talk about nature journaling, which is, I'm sure you all are familiar with the idea. It's a really great introduction to this activity as well. So what I'm going to do is challenge you to get out a piece of paper and a pencil, and we are going to do a quick sketch challenge with a scenario here. So you are going to pretend that you are an ornithologist who needs to sketch a bird quickly so you can identify it later. And you're in a place that you've never been before, so you don't have a ton of information to work with beforehand. So I'm going to play for you a clip from the Panama Fruit Feeder Cam, and you'll have a couple minutes to try and sketch down what you're seeing, and then I'll ask you a few questions and we'll see if we can identify what we were looking at. So pay attention to details that you think might help with identifying it. And I'll be sketching along with you, so you'll see my own poor attempt. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I'm noticing while we go. I notice it has kind of a shortish down curved beak. So I'm trying to capture that. Remember here that we're not really going for scientific accuracy. We're going for capturing enough information that we can identify it later. So you might want to take some notes. On like color and even behavior. Okay. Gonna give us a 30-second warning here. Whoop, new bird came in for a second. All right, so I'm gonna let the video continue to play a little bit while we chat. So we've got 4 birds on the screen. Are they the same species or are they different species? Oh, there goes a little hummingbird. There's a big size difference, isn't there? Yeah, but they are the same, right? And somebody's saying that they're adults and juveniles. Yes, there's some feeding going on, isn't there? Adults feeding the chicks. Nice. I like this clip because the kids will pick up on that behavior. And so that's really fun for them to notice that. All right. So what I'm noticing and what I wrote down on my paper is I'm noticing that long tail, medium length neck. I've written down some notes saying that the tail is dark gray and the top of the head is dark gray. The back is brown, the belly tan. Those are all great color pattern cues, which can be great for identifying it. So let's see if we can identify our bird. Based on our drawing and your notes, which bird were do you think we were looking at? Seeing lots of twos coming in. Absolutely. We were looking at the gray-headed chachalaca, which if you've never said that name out loud, I can't recommend it enough. It's delightful. So you can start to see some ways that we can build connections in our students' minds between art and science and how they complement each other wonderfully. And it's fun for students to do a challenge like this and start thinking about, you know, people who are recording species they've never seen before, you know, what challenges did that involve and what skills and things like that. So really fun way for students to play out a cool scenario. All right. So I hope that you picked up on some fun activities. Yeah, Sandra, lots of movements in, you know, real life scenarios for sure. So I hope you picked up some fun real life activities and are inspired to incorporate some art and science activities together. If you would like to receive a letter of completion for one contact hour, you can email us at k12lab@cornell.edu. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat window. We still have a couple minutes left. Thank you, Jody. Hey, Kathy, if you're interested in CEUs, we do have the option available. It should be available in our store. If you go to our webinar page, there should be a credit options listed in our professional development tab on our webpage. You would purchase them through our store. There's a couple different options. So you could watch all 10 webinars and receive a credit that way, or you could watch a few webinars and do an implementation plan, or you could do one webinar, an implementation plan, and then a report on implementation. So you purchase the CEU, and then at the end of when you've completed it, you mail us our work and then we will fill it out for you, if that makes sense. Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming to our first webinar in the series. Hope to see you at a future one, and enjoy your fall. I hope you're having as beautiful a day as we are.